Welcome back to Revving Up with Revenge Consulting, the show where we uncover the revenue growth tactics shaping today's modern sales organizations. I'm your host, Matt Haller.
Hi, everyone. I'm Quang Do, and I'm super excited to be joined by my good friend, Matthew Sadowski.
Today, we are talking all about revenue growth and how Kelso Industries was able to go from zero to $1 billion in revenue in just 4 short years. So, Matthew, that is a crazy growth trajectory that not many companies were able to achieve. Can you take us inside the story and how that whole journey started?
Yeah, it's a pretty amazing story. 0 to $1 billion in 4 years. It's insane. And it feels like that many days because we're going through so much change and growth that some days I come home and I'm like, how am I going to get everything done? Actually, that's most days. But the excitement is what drives us beyond just the amount of work involved in moving an organization quickly. Let me take you on a quick journey. Kelso Elementary School is where Steve Carroll and Steve Nicholson met in Oregon. They grew up together. They went to college together. They were roommates and then went their separate ways. Nicholson went over, and it's Steve and Steve, by the way, right? But Nicholson went over into the private equity world, and Steve Carroll went into construction management, went back, got his MBA, went over to Walmart. They stayed in touch, obviously, over those years, and then they connected and got to the point of forming Kelso. They chose Kelso because it is their elementary school. If you go onto our website, you can see an icon of a horse. It's the Kelso Colts, and now it's grown up into this mighty horse. In fact, we just rebranded, and using that rebrand, Steve Carroll's words were, that horse cannot look like a pony, and it needs to look very manly and maybe like it's going to kill someone. So you guys can decide what it looks like when you go onto the website. That was a fun project for me on the marketing side. Let me fast forward. So they reconnected. They formed Kelso in 2021, and really it was through their first acquisition, a company in Phoenix, Arizona. Steve Carroll said, I'm going to move from Arkansas, where he was with Walmart. I'm going to move and essentially buy a job. So they bought the company. They were backed predominantly Peterson Partners, a private equity firm, and they helped to get that going. It was a very challenging experience. And they almost got to the point that I think if they had managed things on their own, it might have ended up pretty poorly. But because they were by Peterson, they worked through those hiccups and speed bumps. And that was the first year. So we're talking 21 to 22, essentially. Then their second acquisition opportunity came along, a guy named Pancho that works and owns a company called Advanced Heating and Cooling. And Pancho said, yeah, I'd love to work with you guys, but I don't want to sell the company and walk away. I want to grow with you. And they went, wait a minute, maybe this is the way that we can grow and make it work, because of all the issues and headaches they had with their first acquisition. Those didn't happen with their second acquisition, right? When they acquired Advanced, they saw that Pancho wanted to stay. He wanted to partner with them. They continued to grow now with both of them working together. And then they realized, yeah, we're onto something. And that was really most of like the second year. And then they started moving into the additional acquisitions toward the end of 2022. And then 2023 is like full hockey stick, right? So they went from that to when I joined in February of 2024 to 15 acquisitions. So it's like essentially 2 to 15 in that period of time. And because they realized this is the way to do it, let's find companies that want to continue forward, but don't want to go at it alone. And so they went through all those acquisitions. When I joined, it was about 15 companies, 500 million in revenue. And now we're at 29 and $1 billion in revenue. We have partners that have joined the organization that are, fully owned, right? But we work together, and this goal is that the sum of the parts is much larger and better than those individual parts. Combining those, we have greater impact and greater opportunity as a business in all the different markets where we operate today.
That's the thing people are usually doing when they're doing growth by acquisition. The idea is the sum of the parts is greater than what any one of them can do on their own. But then it's also true that 80% of acquisitions fail. And it doesn't seem like that's the case at Kelso. So what's the secret to getting acquisitions to work and not get into the organization and be that kind of redheaded stepchild that's so difficult to integrate into everything else?
Great question. I think it's a combination of things. I do think that Steve and Steve, as our co-founders, they did figure out that right recipe, and it is about partnership. We have 4 core values as a business: partnership, innovation, excellence, and safety. Partnership is first because that's the foundation of how we've grown the business. When we acquire a business, we say, we're here to partner with you and help you grow. We don't want to fundamentally change your business. We want to maintain the culture of that business, what's working well for them, and don't fully disrupt it. I think many organizations tend to come along and say, hey, my way is going to be the best. I'm super smart. I've just bought you. I'm in charge. And their ego is outsized, and then it crushes the business. We want to maintain those partnerships with these great businesses that have been thriving. They're looking for that additional growth. The difference also is partly our industry. If you look at the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, we call it MEP plus because we do things beyond that. That industry, it is a tried and true industry. It's not a flashy industry like tech, but this industry knows how to make money. And it's an industry where it's needed, right? You have to have electricity, plumbing, mechanical HVAC systems. You can't function in a building or a plant without those things. Our industry is the central nervous system of a building. Without it, the building is not inhabitable. Right. And so because of that, it's an industry where it's needed. And because of that, from the financial perspective, that cash is there from the get-go. Another example is when you look at a tech acquisition, those businesses don't have cash flow to the bottom line, like their EBITDA is not actually there, right? Because of whatever they're doing. With us, it's there from day one, and we maintain that and try to grow that over time. And I think that is, I wouldn't call it unique, but it's been part of the recipe of success for Kelso.
Do you think there's also a cultural component? Because you've had a long career in HR, is there also a component where the employees coming with these acquisitions are like, I don't really care about the brand as much that I'm working for, so much as I'm being treated respectfully, I've got good hours, and that's different from a bunch of Google employees, a bunch of tech employees who might be expecting something different or have more of a affinity to that brand as a family that might get in the way of that integration into the new identity in that new company?
So that's kind of a loaded question for me, and I'll tell you why. So Kelso, 4 years and running, but these businesses are not 4 years old. These businesses are, in many cases, much older, almost 100 years in some cases. They've been around a long time with their distinct identities and cultures. From a Kelso perspective, the clay is very wet. We're still defining the Kelso culture, and we're not trying to squash and crush the cultures of each of these businesses, of the operating companies or opcos. It's a little bit loaded because you look at that and say, what is the Kelso culture? It's TBD, to be defined, and we're working on that. I'm actively working on that right now, sitting in my seat without trying to crush what's working super well in the other organizations. So all that said, when you're talking about why does the employee stay or why do they choose to go, that varies drastically across our businesses right now, partly because of the sub verticals that they exist within. And a big part is because of leadership. Right? There is an absolute correlation, in my opinion, between leadership, employee engagement versus profitability of a business. The more engaged those employees are, generally speaking, the more profitable that business is. In February, we launched our first full corporate-wide employee engagement survey, and we got those results back. We're seeing that correlation now. We're seeing that like, wow, this business has engagement scores through the roof. They are hitting their budgets. The people love the leader that's leading that organization. It's all working, right? And then you see other groups where the scores are not as solid, the financials are not as solid, the turnover is higher. All those things work together. Right? And my job as our chief HR officer is to be looking at that and saying, how can we help? We want to help these leaders be better. We want to help them succeed through their people because ultimately that increases our bottom line.
Along the lines of these indicators, growing and adding all these companies, I imagine you've looked at many more than the ones that you've added. So what's been, from your perspective, the cultural people dynamic for those that made the cut versus those you're like, yeah, probably not?
So it actually goes both ways, right? So I'll answer that to say, what makes the cut? And then also, why do companies choose us to acquire them? Because they have other options too. It's becoming a very competitive space in the roll-up world in MEP. To address the first criteria, are they in a location where we want to play? Are they rounding out MEP? Let's say we have mechanical and electrical in a market and want to add plumbing. We will target companies that can round that out. We want the cross-selling opportunities within that market. In addition to that, we just finished an acquisition in a different market, can't announce it yet, but it's a market where we don't exist. And we're excited to be in that market because we've been targeting that market for quite some time. And so that's the criteria that we use to try to find those companies. And then we go through a full quality of earnings process. It's extensive. It's very costly. It's a ton of money that we spend on these quality of earnings because we want to make sure that these businesses are sound, right? That, okay, what they're telling us is true, right? And we rely on partners to help us through that process. And then at the same time, the front end, the team like Adam Gerlach, who's on the team and manages our M&A, is looking at that with his team and determining like, do they fit culturally with our business and making sure that it's congruent and that that's leaders that can be trusted, that have high integrity and that care about their people. We have seen businesses where like they don't care about their people. You can see it, you can tell, and we would be inheriting that problem. And that's, sometimes not something we want to do. On the flip side, so I'm going to answer the question you didn't ask. Why do companies choose us, right? And the latest one that we had was this conversation that I had just a day or two ago. The former CEO of the company, she said, I chose Steve and Steve. They're the face of the business, right? As our chairman and our CEO. I chose it because Steve and Steve, they're just good people. They care. And that's honestly, it's a differentiator for us. He said, I talked to others and they were all about the business. They didn't care about my people. They didn't care about who I was. And it matters to them. Most of these businesses are small. And so because they're smaller businesses, it's all about the family-centric culture. And we're trying to maintain that as we grow, which is hard to do when you get to the size that we are. But we're trying to maintain that within those operating companies. And so far, it's working, which is great.
You mentioned that one of the values of working in a larger organization is the ability to cross-sell and make connections across different opcos to bring the right specialist into a bigger project. I'm curious how that plays into your tech consolidation strategy and how each company will bring in their own phone numbers and websites and all the stuff that comes with owning a business. What's your philosophy on getting everybody onto a consolidated, unified reporting system platform to work together? Is that a big priority, or is it, we know that if we try to do that, we could be opening Pandora's box, and maybe that's not the best solution? Let's let what works and focus on making our operators more successful. What's the approach that Kelso takes?
That's a great question. And that's something that we've continued to discuss on a regular basis. What I call it back office, all the systems, all the support level positions, we are trying to be more integrated from that perspective. From a go-to-market perspective, front end, it's still pretty separated because they're different brands in different areas. So if you have a mechanical, electrical, and a plumbing company, you don't necessarily need to be the same brand. You can have them working together because they're not competing. They're actually working to gain business together. It works better. So on the back office, we are moving into more of that central system scenario and that mindset. It's multiple reasons for it. One is that we can share data back and forth. Another is our investors want to be able to see the data. It's faster for us to grab. Another is that we are able to share best practices across the organizations. And we do feel like that's somewhat of a differentiator for us in our business, where a lot of our competitors that are bigger or same size, a little bit smaller than us, they have disparate systems that don't talk. You can use a data lake. You can do a lot of things that you can do to start sharing it from a data perspective. But for us, we're working on the process. And how do we improve that process? There is a lot of overlap in these businesses. So how do we leverage that and help them by removing some work so they can focus on the day-to-day operations of growing their business? Is our focus? Are we perfect at that? No. Are we getting better? Yes. And are we working on that every day? Absolutely. That is a core area of focus for helping us to grow the business.
Amazing.
Quang, another question, because I can keep talking about tech stack for 20 minutes.
I do have another question. I've seen some of the work you've done on the front end, keeping a consistent overarching Kelso Industries brand, but also allowing each sub opco, as you call it, having their own unique identity. Just help us think through it. I think you've done an amazing job that a lot of companies don't do. They either allow everyone to operate completely autonomously and independently, or they try to smush them together. And I think neither is optimal. How did you think through it? What did you do? And how's it working?
Yeah. In the initial stage, we really try to baby step our way into the integration. Something that we've historically done is in some cases, we've waited on the actual announcement. Some of our operating companies are like, I'm really concerned about turnover. I'm really concerned about losing some key people. And in some cases, we wait like 4 months before we even announce anything. And then they say, hey, I have an announcement. This company's been sold and I sold it 4 months ago. And everyone kind of goes, wait, what? And it's like, exactly. He goes, we're not trying to make fundamental changes. And then we work our way into the changes that they need to make. Our process is really, again, like front end of it. All the field employees, those customer facing positions remained independent. We're starting to co-brand now, which is exciting. We're starting to see a Kelso Industries company showing up on our OpCo websites and in their branding. But then we tell them that back end is where you're going to feel the most change. So we prep office staff, finance, accounting, HR, IT, payroll. We say there's change and it's coming and here's what's happening. Benefits are going to change. That does impact the employees. Our goal is to not make highly disruptive changes because we feel like that. We tried to more slowly step into it. So we are on the side of more right now, not full autonomy because it's a hybrid, but we do err on the side of we want you to feel like you're fully empowered to run your business, right? And manage your business. And I think so far, that's been working for the company.
I have to ask a controversial question because that's what makes the podcast interesting. There's a PE strategy that exists where private equity firms buy local electricians, plumbers, and build up a monopoly in that space and then move on. It doesn't sound like that's the Kelso Industries approach at all. From your strategy and your perspective, what's in it for the customer with the approach that you've taken for acquisitions and building this specific business? And how does that compare to the less than ideal approach of traditional private equity? Let's buy up the market and jack up prices.
Yeah, that's a great question. It is fraught with some controversy. I feel like we've been very fortunate that Kelso has investors that allow that flexibility. Steve and Steve from the get-go have said, we're not in this to grow it and flip it. Steve Carroll himself hopes to be here for a decade plus. He's like, I want to see this company grow to be 10 billion. That would be awesome. Right. And so he's in it for the long haul. He's thinking and acting in terms of the next decade, not the next year or two. They have been really focused on finding partners that will allow that flexibility from an investor standpoint to help them grow that business in that way. We want this business to grow. Eventually, hopefully it would be, probably going public, right? But like it would be something that stands the test of time, right? As Kelso, it's not something that we expect to get absorbed or acquired by someone else. We want this to be someone that we look at our competitors and say, we're one of those top 3. Surprisingly, because it's such a fragmented industry, we're already top 10, which is insane to think about.
Wow.
But we're one of the top 10 in our industry already.
It sounds like the key is the business is founder led and it's supported by investors, some of whom might be technically private equity companies. That's different from saying I'm a private equity led acquisition and my goal is buy up these assets, build this business, flip it, get out. That is the differentiating factor that makes the magic sauce happen at Kelso.
I think that's a big piece of it. That's what drew me here, right? Seeing Steve Carroll reaching out as a CEO and co-founder, like the passion he has for this business is fully contagious. It is so exciting to see where he thinks it's going to go, and it permeates throughout the organization. Steve is excited about the growth because he's been there from the get-go. He has full ownership of where we've been and where we're going. And that's our hope. Our hope is that long term, right, we'll have a leadership team that can grow and evolve throughout the business. Where we are today as a billion-dollar business is very different than when they were chasing checks to get customers to pay so that they can get payroll done in Arizona, right? Like that's where it began for the two of them.
Yep.
Right. It's a very different role that both of them have. And, Steve Carroll as CEO, as the leader of this organization, the face of it, you have to adapt. And where we will be as 3 billion and 10 billion, very different than where we are today. So you constantly have to evolve or else you'll be in trouble.
Matthew, thank you for sharing that story and how we got Kelso from 0 to $1 billion and kind of trials and tribulations, some of the things that we think about that help make this business so successful. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we are going to talk about some predictions for the future. So stay with us.
We're back with my good friend and our honored guest today, Matthew Sadowski. Thank you again for joining us, for sharing your insights, for sharing your story. Give us your predictions. What should folks be thinking about? And don't hold back.
What do you want? Predictions on my space? Predictions on economy? Should we just focus on Kelso as a business? Where do you think we should go?
I'll take predictions on the general economy.
Okay. Do I have a crystal ball? Of course I don't. Are we in a weird territory in the U.S. economy? Absolutely we are. Many listening to this podcast probably lived through the financial crisis of 2007 and beyond. I did. I just finished my MBA at that time. It was very challenging. Then we've had this back and forth with Democratic and Republican leadership in the White House. We've seen tariffs start to impact our businesses. I think that the economy is due for a correction, right? What is that going to do for some of the businesses out there? Make sure that you're able to weather through those types of changes that I think are going to have to come. In Salt Lake City, Utah, good luck, right? You probably can't afford it because your wages can't pay for the mortgage on a home, especially if you're in your mid-20s or early 30s. Something's got to give there. I think something will change. How does that impact businesses? So let me go into then Kelso. We're trying to modify our business strategy to focus on more of the resilient sides of our businesses like service and maintenance. If your HVAC unit goes out, are you going to wait? If you've got a leak in your plumbing, are you going to wait? If your electricity is out, are you going to wait? And the answer is no. You're absolutely not going to, and you're going to call a partner like Kelso. So we're trying to grow that side of the business. So that's one of the things we're doing. Where are we going to be with this AI stuff? This stuff is crazy. You know, a few years ago, we're like, everyone's like, ooh, this is fun. Let's talk about ChatGPT and let's just ask ChatGPT all these questions. And then co-pilots come along and all the different solutions now. And it's kind of the buzz has died down, but everyone's going, it's here to stay. So how do we leverage it? We're in the earlier stages of that right now to say, how are we fully going to leverage AI to do business better? So it's more of the focus right now on probably the finance, accounting, HR, IT, marketing side of the business, right? But we're also thinking about how is this going to help us in the front, like with our estimating process? How is this going to help us with project management? How is this going to help us when we're doing installs and service? Are we going to get to a point where we've got robotics and the robots are actually installing the ductwork? That's really interesting. This is one of the reasons I was interested in Kelso Industries, because I came from digital media and radio, and I came over to here because I'm going, well, can't outsource the installation of ductwork and electrical and so forth to China. That's not going to happen. You can't have Chinese people doing that here in Salt Lake City, Utah, or in Atlanta, Georgia, or wherever. It's an industry that in good times and bad, we have to have it. So that's what attracted me to the industry. But what's really interesting to think about, like, what if we get to the point where the labor shortage that we have, because we absolutely have it in my industry, we cannot find enough people. And eventually AI and other technology is going to come about to allow us to be more efficient with those people. Maybe something that used to take 5 people can take 1 person now. Where that's absolutely going to end up, I have no idea, right? That's still to be determined.
It's so funny that you mentioned that. I am doing my own home projects that definitely involve plumbing. We installed a tankless water heater, and with a couple of pictures in ChatGPT, we could install it. Never even opened the user manual. It knew the unit, it knew the model, the connections, and walked everybody through step by step how to do it. There is a revolution coming that can make people a lot better. There's also a huge downside that we should be questioning and deeply concerned about, that if people don't use AI appropriately, it can profoundly impact the economy in negative ways. But there's also ways it can increase the size of the pie for more people to get involved in those industries.
And eventually, well, you know, I'm thinking thinking ahead to those instructions. Something just popped in my brain about my 16-year-old who just finished her sophomore year of high school. And she had to do this argumentative paper. And the argumentative paper was why AI is going to ruin our society. She had to take a stance. And so reading through it, I'm like, you know, it was awesome. But then I was thinking about it going like, why isn't the high school starting to insert AI into their curriculum? Like, it's moving that fast. Like, it's happening in college, of course, right? At the university level, but it's not as much happening in the grade schools. And I think it will be there, right? It's going to happen, but how quickly is that going to happen? And how are we going to arm these kids that move their way up into the workforce that maybe considered a certain career and went, well, maybe how do I leverage AI to make me even more successful in that career?
We often say that the number one skill in the AI-driven economy is common sense. And, you know, the old adage about common sense.
Totally.
It's not that common.
Not that common.
I think that's all the time that we have for this episode of Revving Up. Matthew, thank you so much for joining us. Another week of awesome insights and learnings and predictions. Quang, as always, it's amazing. And for all of our listeners out there, we will see you next week for another awesome episode of Revving Up with Revenge. Thank you again, guys.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you.